All right, y'all. Welcome to another Friday webinar with the Arkansas Public Policy Panel. I am your host this time around, Osyrus, Bolly, the Racial Equity Coordinator with Arkansas Public Policy Panel, and the host of the Fold and Chair podcast. And today we have a great individual that I'll be talking to. Talking about basically, a lot of laws went into effect August the 1st of 2023 this week. And we're going to get the expertise and a rundown from some of the different things that happened during the legislative session and some of the laws that have gone into effect from State Representative Vivian Flowers.
Yay!
Yay! How are you today?
I'm great. I'm actually at a health workshop out of state, but I made sure to bring my computer. I have my headphones, but since I'm by myself in my room, I didn't have to do that. And I just thank you guys for thinking of me, and I'm happy to be here today to talk about the session, the issues, and sort of where we go from here.
Yeah, no, we definitely appreciate you for accepting the invitation to be here with us today. And as always, you provide so much insight and do a lot of great work during the legislative session. So we just want to, inform the people about what's going on. And, saying what are the next steps that we should be taking as citizens to continue to advocate and to continue to spread the word about what's going on with civic engagement in Arkansas. And so I'm just going to jump right into it, if that's fine with you.
Please.
Okay, and I will say this to all of our live participants. If you have any questions, please put them on the Facebook live chat, and I will try to get those questions to State Representative Vivian Flowers, as well as our Zoom attendees. If you got any questions, please feel free to put those in there, and we will try to get those answered. And we'll jump right into it because it's a really hot topic. We got a lot of hot topics, but we ain't gonna try to touch everything. But right now, the LEARNS Act, we saw a great effort by CAPES being done to get the petition to put that on the 2024 ballot. We're still awaiting word if they're going to get it some time extended. But August the 1st, they say LEARNS Act went into effect. What should we know about the LEARNS Act, and what are your feelings and opinions on that?
Well, so I was vehemently against it, as was my colleague, my Democratic colleague, Denise Garner. Both of us serve on an education committee in the House. I will also say that there were several Republicans who were openly against it. Senator Hickey on the Senate side not only voted against it, but spoke against it. And then you had others who were on the House side who voted and spoke openly against it. There were many Republicans who also voted for it, but had very strong concerns and reservations. Several who confided that they had been threatened and were concerned about being primaried if they didn't vote for it. I think that, coupled with the fact that it was created as one big omnibus bill as opposed to several bills to address different sort of chunks of policy, and it was ramrodded through the process. I mean, from the day that it was announced and made public to the day that it was passed through the House and Senate committees and House and Senate chambers, it was less than 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And you're talking about something that fundamentally changes the education system in Arkansas. And so clearly there was not enough time to vet the issues relevant to every school district, every kid, every educator in the state of Arkansas. Not only was there not enough time to vet it, there wasn't enough time to challenge, to change, and make amendments. So if we start there, just in terms of the process
Mhm.
and how we're still navigating our way through this huge bill. And you've seen, issues like some of the regulatory standards that are created after legislation like this is passed, what we call the rules and regs process. And you heard a lot of comments when, it was going through the committee process where, a lot of the answers to questions would be, well, we'll figure that out in the rules and regs process, or we don't know that yet.
Yeah.
So that's disturbing. And what we've seen already are standards that have been lowered for the profession of an educator, for teachers. Whereas now, you don't have to have a 4-year degree now to be a teacher in Arkansas. You can get a 2-year associate degree. And while one might say, as I'm saying, that is detrimental to the profession, but more so even detrimental to the education of our kids, someone might say, well, you have problems in schools where there are too many, there are too many, what am I thinking? There aren't enough teachers in a school. There's a shortage, right? There are too many shortages across the state in different schools and school districts, and therefore you get too many substitutes in a given year. Well, this does not solve that.
Yeah.
You're not really dealing with the real issues for schools that are affected by those dynamics by just lowering the standards. What you're doing is basically making it so that a substitute can become the teacher of a kid who doesn't have the requisite education skills, background, training, and certifications. So that's all we're doing there. The bottom line with this is this weakens an already challenged system across our state that has never been optimally equal and optimally resourced to serve minority kids. So we can start there. And you can see that with regard to the funding issues for programs like the arts. See, we don't have any problem funding athletics, right? But when you start talking about funding STEM initiatives, funding the arts, funding, things that are a luxury to some schools, but a standard to others. Like when I used to work at UAMS and do recruitment, I went to Rogers High School for the first time and was pleasantly surprised, but shocked that it looked like a 2-year college.
Yeah.
They literally have a TV station. And that's great for those kids. That's great for that community. That's great for that school district. But when you have that on the one hand, and then when you go look at Marvel Lane or in Helena, West Helena, or some schools, even in Pine Bluff, Little Rock, where those districts over the last several years had been controlled by the state. And I'm saying that and would remind everyone that, Little Rock School District, Pine Bluff school districts were among the best in the state in that we churned out and turned out Gates scholars and really people who have gone on to do great things all over the world or come back here. So it's not like this, quality education cannot be had. And I'll get back to the legislation and then I'll stop talking and take questions. When you have legislation that instead of addressing the real problems, and that is addressing poverty, addressing health issues, addressing special education was the theme. We were in a 10-hour marathon in education committee. And I can tell you that every person who spoke in favor of the LEARNS Act at some point, except for maybe one person, touched on the dearth of resources and equity as it relates to special education and kids in need of services and educational resources that frankly, we as a state have not been strong in, which is why, you know, Republican and Democratic legislators alike over the years have provided vouchers for those kids, understanding that we need to do better as a state. But to take that voucher dynamic and expand it to all private schools, as well as to homeschoolers, is not only a poor policy that doesn't address the real issues, it also throws educational resources to existing private school families. And it basically what it's going to do is negatively affect those school districts in rural areas, be they A, B, C, D, or F schools, it doesn't matter. Because of the way this was structured, and you mark my words, rural school districts, white rural school districts, will suffer greatly from this legislation. Minority schools, poor minority Delta schools, we've been taken over. We've been suffering. We've been punished as a result and after the Lakeview decision. That's clear. What this does is double down on that and takes these funds and does something that even the state of Idaho this year said no to. A staunchly Republican, largely white state, and when I say white, the population of people in that state are mostly white people. So this is not a race issue as it relates to this policy. This is not about you know, the haves and the have-nots in so much as this is why we want to do this. Those legislators in majority, supermajority Republican, largely white state of Idaho said, absolutely not, this is too expensive, but we did it anyway.
Yeah.
I'll stop there.
Yeah, and if you got any questions, make sure that y'all tap in with us and send your questions in. You got an opportunity to talk to Arkansas State Representative Vivian Flowers. You touched on it, you know, the impact that this Learns Act could possibly have on public schools as far as money taken away from the public schools, decreasing in the services going to be available in the public schools, and how a lot of times these private schools have little to no accountability, you know what I'm saying, once they receive this money. And also, as you mentioned, our school districts, predominantly Black school districts, have been taken over. This will extend that even further into these rural communities who will be taken over by charter schools whenever they deem it appropriate to be. And we know that charter schools make their own rules. And I'll just say this: when you private schools, charter schools, you're making your own rules, that could lead to corruption. That's all I'm saying on that.
Well, we've seen it. It has led to corruption in other states for sure. And even in the state of Arkansas, we've seen charter schools come and go. And I want to remind people, because a lot of times when it's campaign time and people talk about, you know, how government doesn't do this, thus, and so like a business, because government is not a business. Businesses are profit driven, and they should be. Corporations are beholden to their stockholders first, and they should be. Government is supposed to work first and foremost to protect its people. Secondly, to provide resources and infrastructure to enhance and ensure the health of people in their communities. So, you know, protect law enforcement, fire protection, roads and highways, regulatory standards so our air can be clean, our water can be clean. You know, all of those things are the things government is supposed to do. And when you start having an expectation that they run like a business, what you're doing is putting tax resources in the coffers of entities that are profit-driven, profit-motivated first. That's why we see what we see with how our health systems are being handled, where anywhere where you look and see a third party, profit-driven industry controlling your health, your insurance, your clinical services, you're never going to see money saved and health get better. Now, that's what they bring to the table, that, oh, you know, the government hasn't done a good job because people are sick. Well, people get sick because people grow old. Keep living. But you can't show me anywhere in America where a health system has done it better in terms of the outcomes being that people go to the doctor more. There's a lower incidence of death or illness under the direction of a private entity versus a public entity. It can't happen because there has to be a profit in that situation. If there's a profit, then that means that fewer resources are dedicated to the health, to the resources. And that's not demonizing business or profit making. When it comes to government, it's the role of government, and we are supposed to be the ones held accountable to protect our people, to ensure the health of people and communities with the resources that make sense for government.
I wholeheartedly agree with you on that. You know, you can't run schools like businesses, because businesses usually cater to the individual or try to cater to the individual. Schools are publicly funded, so public interest is the main priority. And, you know, we can't be trying to please the individual, because a lot of times the individual we're trying to please is the adult or the parent, and the priority is the student. So we have to, you know, public interest has to do our job. We have to do our job and take care of our students and make sure that they're our priorities all the time, and not, you know, get into this whole thing where we're trying to make money off education, because that is not the goal. I just want to touch on this for just a second. On the one other thing on the Learning Act, we saw the effort for the petition, and I think they fell short a few thousand, maybe a couple thousand on the signatures. Isn't there opportunity for that petition to be extended a few days, or 30 days or so?
I think so. I'm sorry, I didn't let you finish. I'm so sorry.
No, that was pretty much it. I think they could get their 30-day extension to meet their goal if I think the Attorney General allows that to happen.
Well, I mean, it's been the position of the Attorney General's office to support the LEARNS Act and its implementation. So I don't think that we will see that. But I think that what has been demonstrated is that many, many people are concerned and have reservations and are supportive of it. You know, the CARES organization is not an out-of-state, you know, entity that wants to see a casino happen here or medical marijuana. So they have millions of dollars to hire people over a period of months and lobby folks to make sure that, you know, it wasn't that. That was a grassroots groundswell of everyday Arkansans who almost met a criteria, which, by the way, and this kind of would lead to a conversation about voting and election laws, but there have been many measures that have been passed over the last 2 legislative sessions that make it harder for citizens like us, like you in particular. You know, I understand that I'm in a different position as a legislator, so I'm going to say citizens like you to use a process to get legislation passed to change the law that grassroots process has been tainted for sure. And the threshold of the number of counties and the number of signatures just to get it on the ballot, right, has been made much harder.
Yeah.
And so when you think about the fact that they came 2,000 signatures short after laws have been passed to make it much harder, it makes you know that this group of citizens and citizen led communities would have been successful prior to the changes in the law to make it harder to do this in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that the law has done is put this process almost wholly under the Attorney General versus the Attorney General and the Secretary of State, which a lot of the authority did rest with that office, and now it rests with the Attorney General. So, that's something else that we can kind of look at to really see how, this stuff matters. When laws are passed, it matters. The people that you vote for or don't vote for, it matters what happens to you, citizens, after the elections are over and after the session is over. A couple of other things I wanted to mention about the LEARNS Act is it not only steers public dollars away from the public sector and public needs into private coffers, private schools, charter school interests, even though they call them public charters. Mm-hmm. They will definitely be in the role of private, because part of the law stipulates that if basically, and I'm going to say this as layman as I can, public schools that get in trouble have to or are incentivized to hire and contract with approved private firms or with state charter schools. So if a charter school can serve as a consultant for a traditional public school, now they are playing the role of a private entity whose job it is to work on school, to help other schools with school improvement mechanisms. There are people who have consulting firms that are based on providing those services, but what Arkansas has said is you can have a C-graded public charter go into a contract with a C-graded, you heard me, a C-graded traditional public school. So now you have two levels of accountability, where a charter school could have a C and they are in the position of serving as contractor, but a traditional public can have a C grade and certainly D and F, and they are in trouble and have to spend some of their money to hire somebody else who is supposed to be doing the same thing they're doing. So the issues around equity, and certainly the bill doubles down on this movement against quote unquote CRT. That's in the legislation. Purported incentives, and I say purported because they're not fully funded, around literacy, that's a pilot. The incentive for schools to access matching funds to provide maternity leave. Well, that will, because it was done that way instead of grants for financially needier schools, you're going to see a situation where that same school with the TV station, Rogers, that school district will be able to access money from the state, use some of their own money, and provide a benefit to its teachers in an already attractive, wealthy, and successful school district.
Yeah.
So they'll attract teachers who go, oh yeah, I want to teach there. They have a maternity leave benefit. Whereas the teacher who's in Jefferson County, we're just now prayerfully coming out of state control. So we will have a new everything, new school board. We won't have the resources to provide that benefit.
Yeah.
And so it further creates this divide between schools with money, schools with enough students so that you can have money, because any area where you have a declining or a population that is not growing, you're destined to not be able to compete already, whether you're an A or F school, doesn't matter. And when you have quote unquote incentives like these, that you're already wealthy and comparatively successful schools can take advantage of, you've created a further wedge and divide between those struggling school districts and the school districts with a lot more in the way of resources and that are more attractive already to teachers, so that you might have a teacher that starts out, in Watson Chapel, and that teacher's spouse might get a job or have a job opportunity in Northwest Arkansas. So now that teacher is experienced, credentialed. Hey, let me see if I can get a job at Rogers, and you get this job at Walmart, and we'll go ahead and move. Well, now you've lost that family, you've lost that teacher, you've lost their income, which further puts that school district in Jefferson County in peril. And meanwhile, the resource, the incentive, and the benefit that should have been at the Watson Chapel School District to keep that teacher was actually used to steer that teacher away from Watson Chapel. And that falls true to Monticello, anywhere in North Central Arkansas. People are not flocking to those sort of inland rural areas of the state. And so that's one of the faults, I think. And when you add to it that the homeschool from the fund that was created by the LEARNS Act for the vouchers.
Yeah.
So there's a limit, right? There's a threshold or a cap for the amount of money that can be spent on vouchers for homeschoolers. And it's very specific for the first 2 years. In the first 2 years, the cap is, I think, 1.5%. The second year, the cap is 3%. Guess what the cap is after that?
I don't want to guess. Go ahead, Tim.
0.
Yeah.
There is no cap.
All right.
So you go from 1.5% of all Arkansas students eligible to take advantage of this voucher, then 3%, then 100%. So the only real cap, and it's not a legislated cap, after that, after those 2 years, is just whatever's in the budget.
Yeah.
And so if you have a legislature that decides, more of my constituents, they want homeschool, so we're going to divert money from over here where these schools have closed, and we're going to put it over here and allow more people. And this is the thing. Let's say somewhere in North Central Arkansas, you have families whose kids spend, an hour and a half, 2 hours on the bus because they're in a rural area. And now, let's say I'm in a family of 6. My husband and I have 4 kids, and next year, 3 of them will be in school. So now all 3 of my little ones will be on a bus all day. Plus, I don't make that much money in North Central Arkansas. And I have a baby that I got to put in daycare who might be 2 years old. Guess what I might think about doing? Coming on home, homeschooling all 3 of my kids, take advantage of that voucher, put some computers get some approved expenses covered, and I'm gonna teach my kids myself, become a part of a co-op. We probably save money doing that than me holding on to my $20-something thousand job and spending most of it and my kids being on the bus. So, and of course, you know, if I'm in an area and those are my circumstances, why wouldn't I take advantage of that? So that's when I pull my kids out. Those are 3 kids that are no longer in that school district. It could be a school district, but now my kids aren't there. They lose that money. And so that takes away from that district to be able to provide resources for all the kids, including and especially special education, because there aren't very many private schools in areas like that.
Yeah.
So when you think about a place like Melbourne, that's a concern.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. And you touched on it. You mentioned in the beginning that this would hurt rural communities, and how they were going to be the most vulnerable with this act because of that position. And we're talking about, we've already seen the transition of a lot of teachers out of the profession during the pandemic. And we know that there's high competition for those teachers in all of the school districts. And so it would be a no-brainer for a lot of them to leave one school district that's suffering and go to a community that's thriving and take those jobs in those communities when this is supposed to be something that supposedly supposed to be an equitable thing and making it better for everybody, and it's really not. I do want to mention this too. If the Cape efforts do get extended, they did get over 52,000 signatures. And so we need to know in our community, if that opportunity for that petition gets extended for another 30 days, you know, take advantage of it and go sign it so that we can make that decision to put it on the ballot on November 2024. And,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying, let our voices be heard. I got one question from the listener, Andrew. Andrew says that he appreciates the update on the LEARNS Act and how it's impacting the schools. But he's also curious about any legislation that impacts food assistance programs in the state of Arkansas.
Yes, I think the last 2 sessions we passed some legislation. One that, and I don't know the bill number, and I can try to look it up while we're on this Zoom. But and I want to say my colleague, Representative Jamie Scott, passed some legislation to ensure that there are resources made available to college students, because research has shown that there is a high level of food insecurity for a lot of poor students who aren't going to say, hey, I'm poor, I can't eat, I can't afford food, kind of thing. And so I know that has been done. But what I could do is get I could find out.
Okay.
I don't know off the top of my head, because that just is not my area, but I do know we passed some legislation, at least that bill, but I feel like there are 2 or 3 other bills that might qualify as an answer to that concern.
No doubt. And I'll just add this too. For any questions about food insecurity, I suggest that people looking to join the Citizens First Congress. There is a group in Citizens First Congress, a coalition of members working on food insecurity issues in Arkansas, and trying to put forth legislation in the 2025 legislative session to address those issues. If you're in Little Rock, also, I encourage you to take that food tax, the Little Rock Food Task Force, put together by City of Little Rock city directors. They're doing a food insecurity survey, food desert survey, to try to make recommendations for 2023 and to help out those communities outside in the Central Arkansas area to make sure that they address those food insecurity issues. So most definitely look into the Citizens First Congress, and also, like I said, if you're in Little Rock, look into that survey by the Food Desert Task Force. Got one more question, and I'm gonna jump to this mass incarceration bill because we got to touch on that. Phoenix asks, why are predominantly Black schools all over the state of Arkansas low funded? I got some answers on that, but I'm gonna let you, Representative Flowers, answer that if you can.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I just saw that. So that's a really, really, really big question. And the answer is definitely a big one and multi-pronged. But I think the simplest way to address that is, when you look at how schools are funded, they are funded with state funding, federal funding, and sometimes, low income schools get additional funding from the feds to address certain issues, for sure. But largely, at least locally, schools are funded based upon property taxes.
Yeah.
And so, and I, would ask, why is that? I mean, if for a government responsibility that is constitutionally mandated and constitutionally protected, but yet it's not a state funded, at least by itself. It's not wholly the responsibility of the state. And I get why. I mean, we can talk about how that works out all day long too, and what the implications are in terms of the socioeconomic divide, and certainly racial implications following the enslavement of Black people, and what integration is meant through the Jim Crow. I mean, there are a lot of historical implications that would give rise to why we do things today, good, bad, and ugly, right? There have been a lot of state and federal constitutional measures that have dictated that we move away from this over here and do this way. And then, but at the end of the day, local control, local property taxes often dictate what kind of support a school district has. And if your community is largely poor, then the resources will be less, the structures, and facilities will be lacking, and other resources. Some resources won't exist at those schools because of that differentiation. That's the shortest answer I can give.
I got you. All right, so I appreciate all of this insight that you've given us. We want to touch on what I told you earlier, what I call the mass incarceration bill that was signed in the legislation. And that also went into effect this August the 1st. And I call it the mass incarceration bill is because they put over $400 million into building another prison.
Two,
my bad. 2 prisons, more beds. What is it, between 3,000 and 5,000 more beds? And also, basically certain crimes, you won't be eligible for parole until you do 85% or no parole at all, up to 100% of the time. And so
right.
What just tell us what's going on. What's the whole purpose of this?
I couldn't tell you the purpose or intent because I wasn't at the table in that sausage making process, because we have a lot of sausage making that goes on when we're working on and getting legislation passed. But I would say this, that Senate Bill 495 or Act 659 of 2023, here we had another 132-page document.
Yeah.
That was pushed through in a very, very short period of time, not a whole lot of vetting. It was pushed through toward the end of the session, so a lot of the debate happened toward the end of the session, oftentimes with rules suspended and at night, you know. And I don't know, I'll say this. I think that some of this might sound good for people who are concerned about crime, and crime is an issue. Certainly, I'm legislator to a very large part of Jefferson County, Pine Bluff, and we definitely have our challenges and struggles with homicide and gun violence, as does many other areas across the state and across the country. But the biggest point I will make about the Protect Arkansas Act is we are taking tax dollars and pouring it into measures and resources that will not resolve our issues with crime. It will not make our communities safer. And we can point to some isolated examples of someone getting out of prison on parole and they commit another crime or they do something heinous. But I can point to way more examples of people who did all of their time and got out and committed more crime, or and not really that, people who haven't been to prison yet and committed the murder or committed the robbery, or, you know, if the focus is not on crime prevention, we are not going to do anything to resolve the issues. You can only keep people in prison for so long. And when I say for so long, so yeah, if somebody's in prison for 10 years, 20 years instead of 10, or for, you know, 40 years instead of 20, however you slice it, if you're using, for example, education and treatment programs as punishments versus incentives, and you're not giving corrections any opportunity for inmates to demonstrate good behavior and take advantage of programs so that they can get out early, then you are creating a machine, a mass incarceration machine. And I think that, you know, if I recall, there's a lot of reference to the difference between the federal system and the state system. It's apples and oranges. The federal system is, number one, largely and usually for different crimes. It's the difference between somebody holding up a liquor store versus somebody holding up a bank, or committing credit card fraud, or committing a heinous or violent crime on federal property, or stealing money from the state. You know, the kinds of crimes that we see with the feds are often less violent. But the most important thing to remember that it's way more people in the state system.
Yep.
So what you can do with a small group of people in terms of resources and man and woman power is very different than what you can do with a large group of people. You know, when you're cooking for one family versus cooking for a banquet, you cook differently, right? The resources that you have to spread around is different. And so to me, you know, I understand that we can take a few lessons and see some better ways, but our state prisons are challenged in so many ways. And, you know, I think that at the end of the day, if we've seen on the federal and state level that mass incarceration doesn't work. And as a matter of fact, if we looked at our statistics now, our crime statistics around murder, rape, and kidnapping, for example, right now, it's much lower than what it was in the 70s per capita. So this idea that, oh, we're, in terrible, dire straits as a country, I'm not saying that we don't have issues to deal with, but we need to deal with them effectively and in ways that work to really resolve the issue. And we're not doing that, building 2 new prisons and not building a second mental state hospital for mental health. We know that literacy rates and mental health statistics can not only dictate what our prison rate will be, but predominate in what that prison population looks like now. So for us to say we're going to protect Arkansas by building new prisons, but we're not really doing anything to address our empower our drug courts for the aftermath. I think out of the hundreds of millions of dollars that we're spending, it was something like 5 million that was dedicated to drug courts. How we spend that much money on prisons and on what happens after crime has been committed, but we're not spending anything of note on reentry. We're not spending anything of note on mental health or literacy, I think is a misstep, and we're not doing anything ultimately to resolve the issue and to protect our people. And so to me, it's not about partisanship. There are definitely some racial implications, and I don't even have to say what that is, and we already know that. But if we're looking at the needs of the whole state, how do we protect our people? How do we lower gun violence? How do we help decrease recidivism? It is not by criminalizing more things, taking away incentives for people to exercise good behavior, prison and creating new bed space and keeping people in prison longer. Okay, let's say we do that. What about the people who aren't in prison yet, who are going to commit more crime because we're not engaging in any way that's meaningful to prevent crime if we know what leads to the crime? So the trauma with kids, that legislation didn't get passed to measure that, to address that. So we're not dealing with, nor do we care enough to deal with the trauma that we see kids going through right now. And again, people always want to make this a Black issue. There are so many white kids right now who are being thrust into our foster care system because of the opioid crisis.
Yeah.
If you look at I just talked to one of my city councilmen in Humphrey. They had 2 deaths recently for what's that drug that Michael Jackson died from?
Oh,
That's killing everybody when you touch it.
fentanyl.
Fentanyl.
Yeah.
Fentanyl. I don't know if it's fentanyl or fentanyl, whatever it is.
Fentanyl.
We say
I know
fentanyl.
what we're talking about.
But fentanyl is affecting people, especially our kids. There are 2 people who died in Humphrey very recently. Humphrey. Okay. Can you imagine what's really going on in Jonesboro? What's really going on in Northwest Arkansas? So we're not dealing with our drug problem with the same level of funding, with this same level of focus. There are not any 132-page bills dealing with the problems and the challenges that we have with our mentally ill population and with our drug problem. We're not really dealing with it. Thank God for Tara Shepard and her legislation to make sure that we have some mechanisms in place in our schools if there's a fentanyl overdose to deal with these opioid overdose issues. I could point to you a documentary that has taken place exploring the problems that we are having in our small state of a little over 3 million people and this opioid crisis. And we have the audacity to do omnibus bills, to create vouchers and build prisons, but we got one state hospital and we continue to not reimburse our clinical care and our community care for mental health. How often do you see people begging on the street right now with signs and riding bikes and pushing carts? It is a problem. And I will say this, those people do not look like you and me. They are ignoring a growing problem. And for me, if I see white men on the street with drug problems and riding bikes and pushing carts, and we are ignoring that, this whole state is in a heap of trouble.
Yeah, and all of this stuff ties into each other. When we don't address issues, like somebody mentioned earlier, talking about food, the access to healthy food and the lack of healthy food and food insecurity. We're talking about literacy rates. We're talking about losing funding to education, not treating addictions, no programming for that. All of this ties into why we have a high recidivism rate and why we are the third most incarcerated state in the country. And that's ridiculous when we talk about the United States of America being 5% of the world's population, but over 16% of the incarcerated population. That is ridiculous. And I don't know what they were talking about during the legislative session. This is just a personal note, but when they put this 132-page bill in front of us in less than 48 hours, and they just talked about over and over again how easy it was to get parole. And I know several people who were in positions to get parole and were denied parole. We've been talking about decades of excessive punishment in the state of Arkansas. And like you said, and we still got a high recidivism rate.
Mm-hmm.
Harsh punishment is not going to solve crime. Because if it did, we would already be experiencing what that solution would look like, but we're not. So we have to address the issues that lead up into why somebody's incarcerated. So like you say, mental health awareness, mental health treatment, addiction, treatment for addictions, education, all of these things tie into each other. And we have to pay attention to all of that before we start trying to punish people. I'll
say this. I mean, we already punish people, so yeah. It's not even before we start. And I'm not. If somebody break into my mama's house and hurts my mother or steals from her, especially our seniors, mm-hmm. our children, people who can't protect themselves as well as a fully grown and healthy adult can. We want that punished, and we want that person isolated away from the rest of society, at least for a time. And, I don't have a problem with that, but the over-incarceration of particular groups is a problem. The over-incarceration of people in general is a costly problem. And ignoring the role of government. These reentry programs not only help the people trying to reenter after they've paid their debt to society, but it helps the community that they're going into. It helps them to make sure that they are a contributing, thriving member of society versus someone who is taking from it, who is harming it. And, if you're going to be my neighbor, I would much rather you be working and without addiction, than waiting for me to go to work so you can break into my house and be there when I get back, So it's not just about it, as some people like to characterize prevention programs and reentry programs as being soft on crime, or somehow, you know, people who deserve to be punished for their whole lives are getting the benefit of state funds. It's not that. And these people who are committing crimes, as well as victims who suffer through this and also don't get the level of support and resources they need, you know, they are somebody's kids. They're somebody's dad, somebody's uncle, and they still are Arkansans. And if we're not doing what we can to help people return and get whole, then it's still a danger to all of us.
Yeah. And every addict is not committing a crime either. You know what I'm saying? A lot of times the only crime they're committing is using the drug. You know what I'm saying? So it's not like everybody is out there knocking over stores and doing things to support their habit. You know what I'm saying? It's really about people who have addictions, who they just can't kick right down, and they need our assistance, they need our help. So we have to provide more treatment programs and more sympathy to people who are experiencing those addictions, because it could be anybody in your family.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it could be anybody.
Absolutely.
So,
and I'll add this too. We have to not, I'm reminded of something, I won't get personal and go too deep into this, but this issue touched me recently, where someone drug addicted did steal from a family member. That person never should have been in a position. You know, oftentimes people, you know, want to help folks, but also people benefit because somebody who is that vulnerable is going to work for less money and work jobs that other people don't want to work. And, you know, and sometimes when they are put in a situation where they are likely to take advantage of a situation because the addiction is so powerful over them and over their lives, it just creates more problems, right? So rather than that person being in a position where they aren't right and whole and healed yet, what they need to do is, what needs to happen is we need to have places for them to go and get help.
yeah.
So rather than creating new prison beds, we need to have space, bed space, coverage for people in need of assistance in getting healed from these addictions. And, you know, I know that it takes a lot and the person has to want it and all of that, but I know of people who want the help, but they can't afford it. Or some people who could afford something, but it's too expensive or it's too far. You know, again, I'll just go back to the fact we have one state hospital in the whole state of Arkansas. One. And a growing problem of mental illness and drug dependency and substance abuse. Seems to me that right now, the funds that we dedicated to protect Arkansas will hurt Arkansas, because where we really could protect Arkansas, we're not directing those funds in those areas.
I definitely feel you on this topic for sure. We just, like I say, we just discussing what's just went into law this week to all the listeners out there. August the 1st, you know what I'm saying, Act 659, this was the mass incarceration bill, aka Protect Arkansas bill that we're talking about, and we talked about Act 237 too, as well, the LEARNS Act. I gotta touch on this last topic because we could really do this for another 4 hours if you wanted to.
I'm telling you.
But I'm gonna try to keep.
And then go to dinner and come back and do another 4.
Let's do it, okay? But you know, I saw a lot of social media uproar on July 31st, August 1st, about the new laws that were going into effect. And one of them that really stuck out there to a lot of people, which I knew about it, but it's just great to see people paying attention when things get announced. The permitless carry law. And I had a lot of different feelings about that because for one, for years, people have been running around saying that Arkansas is an open carry state. And we see people do it. We see people do it, and we see a lot of times they're not punished. And a lot of times they don't look like me and you, but a lot of times they're not punished. And so it's been a lot of debate. And so tell us, you know, about this permitless law. What does this really mean now? And is there any point for anybody to get a concealed carry license if we have permitless carry?
Yeah, I think that, so how would I say this? I think anyone who is interested in legally exercising his or her rights to protect him or herself, business, family, whatever, and you own or want to own a weapon, I would caution anyone of color, especially, to get a concealed carry license, because you have something in your hand that says, I meet the criteria to carry this weapon, and I have gone through a government process, and I have this. The thing that scares me most, because I had my own legislation that I worked most of the session to restore the gun rights of nonviolent offenders,
Right.
10 years after they're off paper. So we're not even talking about, so that usually is going to mean anywhere from 15 to 20 years since an offense was even committed. And which, by the way, that failed, but this didn't. One of the gentlemen who helped me with that and who was interested in seeing my restoration bill pass, wanted my support for this. And I was like, I can't do it. I see the arguments that you're making, but before we even get to your broad-based concerns or issues, this would not apply to people of color in the way. And he acknowledged it. And he was like, tell me where we need to go. And, I'm like, well, we need to address that before passing anything like this. And so I imagine a 20-year-old person, 20-year-old young Black man without a felony record, who lives in an unsafe community. And let's say he decides, I'm going to be an Uber driver and, it's not safe, or I'm going to deliver pizza, but I'm going to have this weapon on me. If he does not have that concealed carry license and he has a weapon with him, if he drives around and let's say he gets attacked by someone, and you and I both know and have had this experience, by someone who starts questioning whether or not he's in the right neighborhood. I mean, we've seen so many instances of people driving for companies. And I'm not saying that you could work for a company and carry. I don't know what those rules or laws are, but we've seen instances where people can't even do their job. If they could even be in a big FedEx truck and somebody will attack them and risk, take their lives, and then say that we didn't know who this was. It's crazy. It's crazy to even say this and talk about it because it seems like it's not real, but we know that it is. So, you take that 20-year-old who wants to protect himself, if he gets stopped or he gets in an altercation with somebody who, especially someone who doesn't look like him, and he just has a gun. Well, the thing about a permitless carry is if you have that weapon and law enforcement deems that you were using the weapon in a commission of a crime. So if you have that weapon and you are engaged in disorderly conduct or some kind of fleeing, you may be running from, like, let's say what happened to Ahmaud Arbery, where he had former law enforcement people attacking him and who ultimately took his life. Let's say they hadn't taken his life and he had a weapon on him and he was running, or let's say he was in a car or whatever, he gets stopped and they try to say he was fleeing because he was in a house that wasn't his, looking around, and then he ran from us and, we called you police. Something like that could easily say this person was engaged in felony fleeing and had a weapon on him. Now, all of a sudden, you have this enhanced criminal penalty against you when you were just carrying a weapon according to the law that said, I don't have to have a permit.
Right.
Versus if you have a permit, it's completely, I would say it's an added protection for someone who might feel uncomfortable about how things would turn out if something were to happen. The other thing is you have what's called reciprocity laws in many of our surrounding and outlying states. So if you're traveling through in a car, or even if you're flying, you can't carry your weapon with you, but you can pack your weapon if you're going to another state that has reciprocity laws. And so if you have that concealed carry license and you have a weapon on you in another state or going through another state, then you want to have that in that license with you. Now, outside of that, am I concerned about the permitless carry? I am, because there are a lot of people who are criminals who haven't been caught yet. And if people are now allowed to open carry and now permitless carry, which means I can be in a store and half the people in that store have weapons and I don't know it legally, anything could pop off and they can say, I was legally able to have this. So there are a lot of concerns, and I'll tell you this, most law enforcement leadership and officers do not like it because it also puts them at a disadvantage. If they go into a situation, a store, a school, or whatever, and turns out a whole bunch of people, because we passed legislation allowing people to have guns in schools.
On a journey.
On campuses. The journey is what is the open carry. But I'm saying there was a separate law that allows for guns on college campuses.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Right. And I think another one passed enabling teachers. I can't remember if that passed, but enabling teachers to have a weapon. Bottom line is all of that stuff puts law enforcement officers in greater danger, which is why you see such a shortage, unfortunately, of law enforcement, police officers and teachers. Morale is low. And this is one of the reasons, for sure.
Yeah, so this is great information. A lot of people had questions and concerns about permitless carry. I totally feel you on that. We are, 2021 was passed with a stand your ground state too. So we got a lot of different issues that have went from issues to laws here in the state of Arkansas. And you've addressed quite a few of them. This has been a great talk. I don't see any more questions from the people, but I hope everybody was listening. I encourage everybody to go do your Google and research and learn about these new laws that have went into effect. And not only that, it's all about civic engagement. We got to stay engaged and knowing what's coming, because I know things will be coming down the pipeline once again in 2025 in the legislative session. So we're doing the work now, 2023 and 2024, to prepare ourselves for the next legislative session so that we can be a bigger and more united force.
Vocal impact. Yes.
Yeah. So we can make that impact that we need to. Do you have anything else that you want to, let the people know about, or any final thoughts?
Well, I think you hit it. We could talk about this all day, all night. We're going to talk about it the next day. But what's most important is action. And it's not even just the action elected officials take, it's about action people can take. And I think that the CARE organization is an example of that. But before you even get to that, all of this is predicated on what happens during elections. And I know people get tired of it, but I just can't tell you how important it is that people register and vote your interests. Hold us accountable. When you don't, somebody else is benefiting from you not doing it. And, I know a lot of young people say it doesn't matter, they're going to do what they want to. And that's not true. I mean, I don't know what else to say except, please believe me, it's just not true that it matters when people show up. It matters when people vote. And I'll say this, that, a lot of people think and say, oh, Arkansas is a red state and a blue state. For many years, Arkansas was what they call a purple state because we were a Democratic state, but we voted as a state often for the Republican president. So we weren't really dedicated to one party or another. And there were many people who were Republicans and they would run as Democrats. And you have the same thing now. There are a lot of people who have and who would run as a Democrat, but they want to win, so they want to run as a Republican. And at the end of the day, that stuff, it matters when we're trying to figure out who people are and what you're going to do, and then your next step is to ask people straight up, and then you hold them accountable if they get in position. Really, we are not a red or a blue state, we're a non-voting state. And I'm quoting someone else who said that. I want to say the leader, Steve Grafe, the leader of the CARE organization. I think he was the one that said that. And if he didn't, that would be along the lines of something he would say anyway. So I'm going to give him credit today. That's what we are. And so it's not a destiny that one thing would happen over another. I don't know what else to say to encourage people, especially young people, which is the largest non-voting population. I mean, it's the largest voting population, and it's also the largest non-voting group of voters in the country, and certainly as it stands in Arkansas. If we want to see some different stuff happen, y'all, we have to do something different. And there are a lot of people who do a lot of good work to serve, but the power is not with us. The power is not with the governor. The power is not with your mayor. The power is with the people. The power is with you. You have the power to make sure that we do right. You have the power to put us here, and you have the power to take us out. I don't know. I'm not saying kill us, but you have the power to unelect us.
Yeah. We're not encouraging any of that. We're just saying, hey, go.
Right.
If you don't like what they're doing, vote them out. You know what I'm saying?
Yep. So thank you for being here. And next time, let me say this too. I would love for us to work together on some things that we can share with people, like on paper and on social media, so they can be aware, like, what does all this mean? Because we talked about a lot today. So what does this mean? What do they look out for? Who do they call to change it or to express concern? And we need to prepare people early on, what's coming up in elections and how they can take their power back. Because right now, the people are not the ones driving this, but they could. And I think we need to show people specifically how they can take their power back. Because what we just saw happen with CARE is phenomenal.
Yeah. Shout out to Capes. They did a great job with getting out there in a limited amount of time to go out there and collect over 52,000 signatures around the state of Arkansas. Shout out to all the communities that were involved. Let's keep on supporting those type of efforts, because like you said, the laws changed to make that harder for us to put ballot initiatives and ballot measures on the ballot. And they still did a phenomenal job in doing all of that work and up until the last minute. So
I know Steve, and I know you know him too, and a lot of people who've been involved with this, and I know it's not over, and there is nothing that would stop us from doing this again and being successful for the primary election next year. So I hope and really do believe that we will continue this. And now we will do it knowing that we can get there, knowing that it's possible. So I'm really excited and grateful for that effort and organization, as well as the public policy panel and the work that you and Bill and Camara and others do so well to keep us empowered and informed. So thank you. And I'm so glad that I was able to spend this hour with you today.
No doubt, I appreciate you too. And shout out to all the co-workers, Bill, Camara, Kwame, Ben, Ashton, Brady, Shay,
Yes.
Janice, Jaden, all the organizers in South Arkansas, man. It's a real big team effort. And if anybody would like more information on, you know, how they can get involved during the legislative session or just get involved in your community, I encourage you, like I said, go visit Citizens First Congress page on Facebook, or you can go to citizensfirst.org or arpanel.org too. It's been a great conversation with you. You dropped so many jewels, and we're going to be following up to do more work in the future with State Representative Vivian Flowers. Thank you to all the listeners on this Friday. Hey, we appreciate y'all. Y'all be blessed, and y'all stay hydrated and in the shade in this excessive heat. All right. Peace.
Thank you.
All right.